Welkom almal. Almal wat dit deur die video kon maak. My name is Ernst Roets. I am Head of Policy and Action at AfriForum. Next to me on the one side is Ian Cameron, who's Head of Community Safety at AfriForum. And also on the other side is Dr. Theo de Jager from the President of SAI. So what we will be responding to today is obviously what we've just seen, but also the latest escalation in farm attacks and farm murders in South Africa. We will be announcing a variety of things that we will be doing as AfriForum and as SAI. Among others, we are submitting a letter, an open letter to President Ramaphosa today, which I will read to you. We will also respond to the attacks that we saw, the surge in farm attacks that we saw recently. My colleague Ian Cameron will respond to that, and Dr. de Jager will also talk about SAI's initiatives in this regard, and also the steps that SAI is taking on this particular issue. Also, we should maybe just a quick note about this film that we just played. First of all, thank you very much to everyone, the entire team who was involved with the production thereof, including Susan Norkia, Wilna's aunt, or Wilna's sister at least, Little Wilmin's aunt, who participated in this. The point of this is that this video or this mini documentary will, the plan is that it would be the first of many. To also, because part of the problem that we have is when we talk about farm attacks and farm murders, especially for people who do not work with this on a regular basis, that it becomes an issue about statistics and a debate about statistics and numbers. And it's important to point to people that these were people with families who cared for each other and who cared for their communities. And it's also to point out how these attacks happened. Now, we do know that this particular case is, of course, a very well-known one, which is why we started with this one. Little Wilmin and her mother and father, Ati and Wilna, were murdered on 1 December 2010. And we do know that they aren't the only ones. We do know that there are not only many, there are thousands such examples, including the examples just over the last few weeks. So we plan on making more such films in the future, such documentaries, also as part of our awareness campaign in this regard. So I will read you the letter that we are submitting to President Ramaphosa today. Dear Mr. President, responding to the scourge of farm attacks. As you know, AfriForum is a South African civil rights organization that aims to ensure that civil rights in general and the rights of minority communities in particular are protected. During your address to the people of South Africa on 17 June 2020, you expressed your concern about the alarming rate at which women in South Africa are being targeted in violent attacks. You described the killing of women and children in South Africa as a pandemic. You said that no less than a war is being waged against the women and children of our country. And you described this crime phenomenon as being committed with a brutality that defies any form of comprehension. You expressed your sympathy for the victims when you mentioned their names, and you spoke about them with a great sense of compassion. We will speak of Tegofatso Pule, Naledi Pangindawu, Nompumelelo Chaka, Nomfazi Kabada, Nwabisa Mgwandela, Alicia Korki, and Lindalwa Penny, all young women who were killed by men, you said. They are not just statistics. They had names and they had families and friends, you continued. Such violence has no place in society. Not only did you publicly express your condolences to the victims of these atrocious crimes, but you also announced steps to be taken by the South African government in this regard. You announced an emergency response plan to combat gender-based violence and femicide. You ensured that 1.6 billion rand in government funding was made available to support the implementation of the plan until the end of the financial year. You said that we had to ensure that the victims have access to support and services. You announced that 10 government-owned buildings were transferred to the Department of Social Development to be used as shelters for survivors who want to leave abusive relationships. You also announced that progress had been made in broadening access to support for survivors. You added that 13 regional courts had been upgraded into sexual offences courts. 7,000 evidence collection kits had been distributed to every police station in the country, and 1,000 survivor-friendly rooms at police stations had been made available. You spoke about special measures to be taken by the criminal justice system to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable, including that they should receive appropriate sentences for their horrific crimes. You also said that in order to effectively solve this crisis, we need to ask ourselves the difficult questions. You said that those who shamed and insulted the victims become complicit to these atrocious crimes. Lastly, you said that people needed to consider the consequences of their silence. Mr. President, it is in this context that we write to you about another pandemic that is terrorizing this country: farm attacks. While we agree with your sentiment that special measures must be taken to prevent the pandemic of violence against women and children, we are equally alarmed by the silence of the South African government concerning the severe levels of brutality that people on South Africa's farms are experiencing. When you were asked about this reality in New York in 2018, you said that there are no killings of farmers or white farmers in South Africa. Later, when you were asked to explain your comments, you claimed that farm attacks are minuscule and not worthy of a comprehensive, focused counter-strategy. You failed, however, to take cognizance of the fact that there are only a small number of commercial farmers left in South Africa. While there are tens of millions of women and children in South Africa, there are only about 35,000 commercial farmers left. When we count the number of victims, as you have done in your response to Parliament in 2018, it is also important to consider the size of the group in order to maintain perspective. There were at least 40 farm attacks in South Africa during June 2020, in which at least 5 people were murdered. In the first week of July, at least 4 people were murdered on farms. On 1 June 2020, Dr. Roelof Botha, 59 years old, was hacked to death on his farm near Tulbagh, reportedly with a panga. On 6 June 2020, Eddie Neumeister and Margit Riebler, 67 and 62 years old, were attacked in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands. According to media reports, Neumeister was hacked into pieces in front of Riebler, while bravely fighting off a machete-wielding attacker. On 6 June, Skalk and Lana Kutsia, both 63 years old, were attacked by 3 armed men. They were tortured with boiling water, but were fortunate enough to survive. On 15 June 2020, Kwesi Botha, 63 years old, was attacked by an unknown number of attackers on his farm near Vryheid, where he was tied up, gagged, and strangled to death. On 21 June 2020, Rudy Botha, 60 years old, and Edwin Kotze, 64 years old, were ordered by armed attackers to undress and lie on the floor. Kotze was fatally shot in the neck during the attack. On 23 June 2020, Albert Kiesel, 63 years old, was attacked on a small holding near Sandra in Mpumalanga. He was tied up by an unknown number of attackers and beaten to death. On 24 June 2020, Skalk van Heerden, 55 years old, and Sonja Mostert, 52 years old, were held by armed attackers for 6 hours. Mostert was partially undressed by her attackers and threatened with rape. Fortunately, they survived. On 3 July 2020, the Afrikaans singer Wynand Breed, 45 years old, was murdered on a farm near Worcester. He was shot several times in the chest. On 3 July 2020, a British Falklands War hero was shot dead while protecting his partner during an armed raid on their farm. Former Royal Navy sailor Julian Stobbs, 59 years old, was shot in the head and chest after 4 robbers broke into his farm near Lanseria as he slept on Friday. On 4 July 2020, Ayub Ahmedjan, 32 years old, and his wife Zakia, 26, had their children aged 4 and 8, were attacked by 3 armed men wearing face masks on their farm near Vienna. Ayub tried to fight them off, but he was outnumbered and overpowered. The children were kicked by the attackers and taken to a bedroom. Zakia was then dragged into the bedroom. Despite her being pregnant, her attackers showed no remorse and murdered her by slitting her throat. On 5 July 2020, Alan and Marty Wolmerans, 44 years old, and another elderly woman were attacked on a small holding north of Pretoria. Alan was kicked and beaten severely, but he survived. Marty was shot dead. Mr. President, these are but a few of the incidents that happened in the last month on South Africa's farms and small holdings. However, we hope that these examples would be sufficient for you to comprehend the severity of the crisis. Our plea is not for special treatment for South Africa's farming community, but merely equal treatment. We do not know why members of the South African government are actively attempting to downplay or even completely deny the extent of the crisis. In the absence of a proper explanation, we are left to come to our own conclusions. What we require is a recognition of the severity of the problem, which includes an acknowledgement that these attacks are unique and therefore deserve a unique counter-strategy. The South African government has no qualm with developing focused counter-strategies in response to a variety of unique crimes. These include violence against women and children, gang-related violence, copper cable theft, cash in transit heists, and rhino poaching. It is only in respect to farm murders that we are suddenly confronted, at worst, with a justification of these crimes by cabinet members, or at best, a downplay of the existence of the crisis. What is it then that the South African government could do in response to these crimes, you might ask? AfriForum proposes the following 10 steps that the South African government should take to respond to the scourge of farm attacks and farm murders in South Africa. Number 1, recognize the severity of the crisis and release statistics on farm attacks and farm murders on a quarterly basis. Number 2, continue independent research on the true extent of the crisis, the manifestation of these attacks, and the efficacy of a variety of counter-strategies. Number 3, involve local communities through government-funded structures to fulfill the role that was once played by the commando system. Number 4, acknowledge farm attacks as a priority of the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, the Hawks. Number 5, partner with civil society to strengthen the South African Police Service's response to farm attacks. Number 6, revise the National Rural Safety Strategy to make particular provision for a focused reaction to farm attacks. Number 7, establish specialist rural safety units. Number 8, establish a holistic approach to farm attacks as opposed to the exclusively localized focus in response to individual farm attacks, as if they constitute isolated events. Number 9, provide comprehensive victim support during the entire process. And number 10, adopt legislation in terms of which farm attacks are dealt with more comprehensively. This should include the criminalization of hate speech in which violence towards farmers is encouraged or romanticized. Mr. President, there was great anticipation of your presidency. The denial of the extent of the crisis has had a major impact on the impact of those affected by these acts of terror. You must prove that you are indeed the President of South Africa and not only the leader of those who support the political objectives of the ruling party. We trust that you will read this letter with the gravity that it deserves and that you will respond appropriately. With sincere regards. So this letter is being sent to the President's office today. It is also an open letter, which is why we read it, and which is also why we will attach it with the press statement that we issue today to local journalists, but also to our contacts abroad. With that, I will hand over to Ian Cameron.